Howdy, my name is Kendal Workman and I've been showing poultry for 9 years and I've been raising chickens my whole life. I've been attending poultry workshops and I also attended last year the Texas A&M Poultry Institute for Youth. And today I'm going to talk to you about the FFA Broiler Project. First we're going to start with the coops. Now when you're raising FFA broilers, the most important part is to have somewhere safe to keep them so they can't be eaten, and they can have somewhere where they can keep warm. There are many different styles of coops. There's styles such as this one that is for outside, so you can have them on fresh grass, there are also ones that you can have inside a building, like this one was in someone's garage. There's many different types of coops, but you just want to make sure what's right for you and figure out what works best in your situation. Once you've decided on what kind of coop you're going to build, then you want to talk about the shavings. Now, having the right type of shavings is very important for the poultry project. You want to have shavings that are regular pine shavings that work the best. You want to make sure that you get some that are fine but are not too fine, therefore they're not so dusty. You want to make sure you don't have a lot of dust in your shavings or your birds can have respiratory problems. As you can see from this picture, you want to make sure that they're not chunky like this. This can bruise the chicken's breast and cause disqualification at contests. Now I'm going to talk about some of the equipment that you're going to need. There's many different kinds and many different types of equipment that are specific for FFA broilers. I'm going to talk about a few of them. So first, of course, you have to have the right type of coop, which makes sure that the chickens cannot be eaten and that can regulate their temperature. You'll also need waterers. There are many different types of FFA broiler waterers. Most of them are pretty simple with just a top and a base with a tray. There are many different styles. You can get 1 gallon, this is a 1 gallon, but you can also get up to a 10-gallon waterer. You just want to make sure that you can have access to it throughout the day, and you can also, it is easy to clean because they will get dirty. Then there are also many different types of feeders. This is a 7-pound feeder, but when the chicks are little, these are usually too big for them. So you want to have a smaller type of feeder. Some people use feeders such as this, which is a small tray with slots. There are also round ones, or you could just simply put it on an egg carton. If you do the egg carton method though, you must make sure that you use a cardboard one and not a plastic, because the chicks can ingest that and that could cause problems later down the road. You also will need heat lamps. Now because these baby chicks don't have their mom, you're now their mom, you've got to provide them with the adequate heat. And we'll talk a little bit more about temperature regulation in a little bit. But you want to make sure that you have heat lamps and make sure that you get some with the guards, because you're going to have these over shavings. If one of them were to fall and didn't have this guard, they could catch fire and then your whole project would be destroyed. You'll also need shavings like I talked about before. Making sure you get the right kind of shavings is very, very important. Also having a brooder. Now a brooder, if some of you don't know, a brooder is a small confined area where you keep the baby chicks in for the first week of their life. It can be made of cardboard or plastic, and it's just a big ring that the chicks can stay closer to the heat and don't have as much freedom until they get older. Another thing that I like to do that I found worked best is to have a radio. And now you might ask, why have a radio? Well, with them getting used to all the radio noises and the loud songs and the different talking, it helps them get used to having loud noises around them, so when they get to the show they won't be as scared, and it lessens the risk of a heart attack at show. So that's just some of the basic equipment that you'll need to raise FFA broilers. But before you even think about getting equipment, you're going to want to have the knowledge first. There's many different things that you'll need to know, but first do the research. Find out what feed that you're going to want to use. Find out what the right temperatures are, because chicks cannot stay at the same temperature throughout their lifestyle. As they get bigger, they're going to produce more body heat, so you have to keep them at a cooler temperature. The good rule of thumb is to drop them 5 degrees a week. So starting at 95 degrees when they're the day old and dropping that 5 degrees per week. Also, another thing to research is, do you want to do electrolytes? Now some people just give their chickens plain fresh water, which works just fine. But some people also like to give them electrolytes. Electrolytes are kind of like Gatorade for chickens. It provides them with extra vitamins and minerals, and it also encourages them to drink more water, which will help them grow. You also want to do research and find a good feed program. There are many different types of feed programs, and I highly encourage you to research different ones to find out which one you think will work best for you. You also want to have a schedule. One thing that I have always found helpful is that every year before we get our chickens, I write out our schedule. I schedule offline. A lot of different programs have them, such as Producers Co-op and Texas A&M University provide great resources for that. And I put in the number of days that I'm going to have my chicks, starting with the day one that we get them all the way to show. And I line out what feed I'm going to be feeding for this week, what temperature I'm going to have them at, and I check off the days. That way you can keep track of how old your baby chicks are and what you need to be doing. I also put reminders, as in when we take off the brooder, which is about a week of age, and when we're supposed to cull chicks, which I'll talk about in a little bit. You also want to practice showmanship. Now, some people don't do showmanship, but I always encourage it because you've worked so hard on this project, and what a better way to showcase it than talking with the judge and telling them all about the knowledge that you've gained. I always encourage practicing it. Always try to find like another person who's in the poultry industry to help you with that, because they'll be very supportive in helping you get the best showmanship that you can. And then another thing that's really, really important is visit with your feed store. Once you've done your feed schedule and you know what type of feed that you're going to be feeding, always visit with your feed store and make sure that they're going to have the type of feed that you want and that they'll have it on time. Don't wait until the last minute to go pick it up when your baby chicks are coming the next day and realize they don't have feed. Because if they don't have it and you check ahead, they may be able to order it and get it in time. Now, before the chicks arrive, there's several things that you need to do. Set up your coop. Make sure it is completely ready at least 24 to 48 hours before the chicks arrive. You want to have the heat on so it's nice and warm for them, and go ahead and set out your waters and feeders so the water can come up to that room temperature, because sometimes drinking cold water when they're really little can send them into shock. Also, set up all the feeders, and you may need, if it's cooler where you live, you may need to add a heater to supplement the heat lamps to make sure they're at that optimal 95 degrees. So now the birds have come in. We're going to start by talking about raising the broilers. So the most important things that you need to consider when raising your birds is 4 things: fresh water, fresh food, temperature, and ventilation. Those are the 4 key components of raising quality meat birds. You always want to make sure they have access to clean, fresh water and fresh food multiple times a day. Make sure that you regulate your temperature so that they stay at those optimal temperatures, which I said 5 degrees down a week. And that will also encourage them to eat more because they're not hot or cold. And ventilation. Now, some people will say chickens stink. Well, if they have proper ventilation, they should not stink. Make sure you have, during the winter, when they're cooler, make sure you have a fan going to circulate the air. And even when it's really cold and the chicks are young, you still want to run that fan, maybe not constantly, but a few times a day to make sure that they get fresh air into the coop. Like I said, always have fresh food and water available to them. If it's out there or if you're in there giving them fresh food and water, they're going to go eat, even if they're not hungry. And more feed equals bigger birds. Now I'm going to talk about culling for a minute. Culling is very important because as the chicks grow, they need more space. And if you overcrowd your chicken coop, then they're not going to have enough feed and they're not going to eat, and so they're not going to grow as big. So you always want to make sure to start culling early, probably around week 2 or 3. If you see any really small chickens, the one thing about chickens is they never are gonna, if they're small to begin with, if there's bigger chicks and smaller chicks, those smaller chicks are never gonna catch up to the bigger chicks, no matter how much food you pump into them. So you wanna go ahead and pull those small runt chicks out of your coop and dispose of them in a proper way. Then by the time you're 2 to 3 weeks out from the show, you wanna be culled down to about 12 birds per kid. That gives you a little wiggle room in case some of your birds die from heart attacks or respiratory issues, but that'll give them enough room per kid. Now you always want to make sure that when the chickens are going to full grown, you want to make sure you have enough room in your coop to have about, is it two or 3 square feet per bird. So you want to make sure that your coop is big enough and you want to cull appropriately for your size coop. Now, one thing about sick birds is if you've noticed a sick bird, you want to make sure you take it out immediately, because disease does spread very quickly in chicken coops. So you want to make sure you pull that sick bird as soon as you notice it. Isolate it from the group and have them in a separate pen or enclosure. Now, one thing that's changed over the last couple of years is you used to be able to buy antibiotics at the feed store for chickens, but that has now changed, so you will have to take the chicken to the vet if you want. If you've noticed that there's disease in your coop, you want to go ahead and take one to the vet, and they can prescribe antibiotics that should help heal your flock. And that way you don't have to just completely do away with your whole project. So that's one thing to always keep in mind now, is to be prepared to do that if you get disease in your flock. Now, one thing to prevent that is called biosecurity. So you don't want to go from say if you have layers and you go into your show coop, you don't want to make sure you don't wear the same shoes. And if you do, you want to make sure you sanitize them with bleach and water so that you don't transmit diseases through the different coops. Or if you've got some friends coming over that have birds, you know, make sure they sanitize their shoes or wear one of yours so you don't introduce new diseases into your flock. And that's a good way to help prevent having sick chickens. Now with the feed, like I said, it's important to have lots of feed. If there's fresh feed, they're going to go eat it, and the more feed you pump into them, the bigger the birds are going to get. And that's what's important when showing broilers. So when you want to start, for the first 14 to 17 days, you want to have a very high protein feed. 26 to 31% protein is an optimal for the first week or two, and most of the time you can only get that in turkey starter. So you want to start with turkey starter and for the first 7 to 14 days. After that, you'll move on to broiler starter, and that's going to lower the protein content, but it's also going to go up in the fat content. So 24 to 26% protein is a good place for the next 2 to 3 weeks. And then when you're about 3 weeks out from show, or I guess no, 2 or 3 weeks out from show, you want to put them on broiler finisher. Broiler finisher again goes down in the protein content, but it will go up in the fat content, and that'll just kind of help finish them off. And so that's 21 to 23% protein. Now, before the show, there is a couple more things you want to do. Like I said, switch over to the broiler finisher and make sure you keep them at that optimal temperature and ventilation, and always let them have fresh food and water so you're prepared. Now, there is some equipment that you'll want to take. Most shows will provide shavings and pens, so you don't have to worry about bringing that, but you always want to bring a small waterers and feeders that can fit into those cages. Now, they're pretty small, so you won't be able to take the bigger waterers and feeders that you have at home. I always like to try to find small, like baby food bowls, or even laundry caps work really well. It's not a lot, but that'll just keep them, especially with the water, that'll keep them hydrated during the show, and that's less likely of them to die due to heart failure, which is a big problem. You'll also need cages or totes for transport. I've seen chickens transported in all kinds of different containers, so it just kind of depends. You just want to make sure that you can get airflow through there so they don't overheat. So again, like even a dog cage might work, or if you want to do totes, make sure you drill holes in the totes so that they don't overheat. And then what I always like to recommend is bring a change of clothes, because it is a chicken show. You are going to get dirty. So if you're going to be hanging around after the show, just bringing a change of clothes is always really nice to have. And then you want to select your birds. So we usually wait until the last day to probably that morning, depending on what time you show. That way you don't stress out your birds too much, because a lot of times stress is a main concern for death in chickens, especially show broilers because they're so big. But when you select them, you want to make sure that you select them from the breast meat, which is the meat underneath. Never pick your birds from the top, because there's always birds that look big from the top, but when you feel their breast, they're not very big. And the judge is going to be feeling their breast and not looking at them from the top, so you want to make sure you select that way. And also, I always like to say bring at least one alternate bird. Some shows have a different contest depending on the birds, so you might want to always bring at least one extra bird, if not more, for that other contest. But that always gives you a little wiggle room, because when you check in, your birds have to be alive, and if there's any broken bones or bruises on the breast, they are disqualified. And so you want to bring an extra one just in case it bruises or breaks a wing on the way over. That way you don't have to go home without showing. And now it's showtime. So at the show, always have confidence. You did the best that you can, and that's always great. It doesn't matter if you win or lose. I'm very proud of you for just doing the project. And showing is just a small part. The project isn't just about the show. It's about gaining confidence, leadership, responsibility, and doing something on your own that you can do, and then you get to be rewarded by exhibiting that. So always have confidence. Always do showmanship. Even if you feel like you're not prepared, just doing it will give you more confidence, and you'll also get better at it for the next year. Always do showmanship, and remember, you just did your best. So that's all I have for today. Thank you so much for watching.